Welcome, everyone. My name is Judy Gilmore, and I am the director of the Opalka Gallery. And it is a pleasure for me to introduce Terry James Conrad tonight to kick off our artist lecture series, which we produce in partnership with SAGE's Department of Visual and Performance Arts and the Department of Arts at SAGE. We are very excited to have Terry here tonight. Terry's solo exhibition is in the gallery now, Object Permanence, and is on view through March 13th. Our gallery is open. You may come by to see the work in person, and we really encourage you to do so. Our hours are 12 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. On Thursdays, we're open till 8 p.m. And on Sundays and Mondays, we are open by appointment. It is a very safe viewing environment. We have COVID protocols in place. You will be asked to fill out a health form. You will be required to wear a mask and to stay socially distanced. And most often, more often than not, you will be the only people in the gallery, but we do cap visitors at 10 people. So please do feel like you can come by to see the work in person. It is totally worth it if you can make it. And as you'll see through Terry's discussion tonight, so much of the work is actually changing in the show. So don't just come once, come back for a return visit. We also have a very robust schedule of programs that we've put together for the exhibition, curated by Terry himself. Terry is in residence in the gallery on Thursday afternoons and evenings. And on Thursday evenings, he kicked off last week a new series called Dispatches from the Iowa Booth. He'll talk about the Iowa Booth and what that is, where he interviews and presents a collaborator that he's worked with over his career. And we have 5 of those scheduled. They started last week, and the next one is tomorrow night with Dr. Joan Bernhard. So I hope you can join us for those. Those are at 7 p.m. on Thursdays. So there are so many ways to engage with Terry and with the work that's in the show, and we really do hope you take advantage of them, especially if you're a SAGE student. You have no excuse. We want to see you come on over from the art building and come by anytime. These recorded events as part of the exhibition, the programs and events are all recorded, and you can find links to past recordings on our website, opalka.sage.edu. There you will find our opening tour of the exhibition. All of the dispatches will be placed there, as well as other video content that's produced throughout the exhibition. I also want to let everyone know that we will be creating an exhibition website that will be going live in the next couple of weeks. That's another way to visit if you don't want to come into the gallery. And we will be doing a 3D tour as part of that website. So stay tuned for that update. If you are not on our mailing list, feel free to enter your information into the chat box and we can capture that there, or you can go to our website and give us your information there as well. We are producing a catalog as part of the exhibition, and you may pre-order a catalog at the link in the chat box. After you hear Terry's talk, you'll no doubt want to know more about his practice. It's going to be a beautiful catalog that looks at the show and has a wonderful essay by Nicole Hayes, a art historian and critic at Notre Dame. So we really hope that you will pre-purchase that. Those will be ready in April. And that is the website link for that is opalka.sage.edu/Conrad book, and you can pre-order at that site. I'm going to read Terry's bio for you, but while I do that, I'm actually going to show you a video that we captured, a time-lapse video that we captured, and I'm going to share my screen as we do this, and it'll give you a sense of Terry's process. This is one of the presses that's in the show that he will be talking about, and as I read his bio, you can watch as he builds this from the ground up. You'll see the paper, starting with the paper and him reassembling the press. So it's a really great little video that we put together that'll give you a little bit of an idea of what he'll be talking about tonight. So while that's running in the background, I'm going to introduce Terry. We've gotten to spend a lot of time with Terry as he has been in the gallery doing all kinds of crazy stuff with the show, and it's just been such a delight to get to know him. Terry is a native of New York. And he is a 2017 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow in Drawing, Printmaking, and Book Arts, and was the 2015-16 Grant Wood Fellow in Printmaking, and has been awarded residencies at Frans Mazeriel Centrum in Belgium, Penland School of Craft in North Carolina, and the Vermont Studio Center. He has had solo, two-person, and group exhibitions nationally and internationally. And in 2014, he was awarded an SPAF NISCA grant to develop the Adirondack Forum, a collapsible venue made of old printing blocks and other found wood that functioned as a meeting place, performance space, and classroom. For the virtual opening reception on January 26th, Conrad gave a tour of the exhibition, which was just fabulous. And we really do hope, if you can't make it, that you will again go to our website and view that tour. He'll be talking through a lot of the work that is in the show, as well as some other work that he has done over the years. Again, the dispatches from the Iowa booth will continue tomorrow night, and the catalog and website will all be created to document the exhibition. Lastly, Conrad is currently the assistant professor and program head of printmaking at the University of Iowa, and he's an Iowa Print Media Faculty Fellow. He previously taught at Skidmore College and assisted his partner, Rachel Ziegler Sheridan, in founding the Round Lake School, which is a preschool residency in Round Lake that follows the teaching philosophies of Reggio Emilia. Conrad is represented by Bruno David Gallery in St. Louis, Missouri. And with that, I will turn it over to Terry.
All right, can we see? All right, sorry about that. So Judy, the time lapse didn't quite work, so maybe at the end we can talk about that, show that. But all right, so thanks everybody for coming out, and I want to thank a big thank you to Judy Gilmore and Amy Griffin for helping put this show together and make it happen. Without their vision, it wouldn't look like this and wouldn't feel like this. So I'm really thankful. I also want to thank Natasha Holmes for install help. And also want to thank Nicole Woods, who will be writing a piece for the book. Nicole teaches at Notre Dame in art history department. Yes, so first off, I think I want to start off by telling you the name of the exhibition, Object Permanence. And I guess a simple thought about that is that what it exactly means is just because it doesn't exist, just because it's not in front of you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so that's been something that I've been ruminating on for the past year over the pandemic, but also more for its original sort of definition, in that we have a 13-month-old baby at our house, and she has been wonderful to watch change and grow. But then also taking that idea of object permanence, the idea that, you know, if it's not in front of you, it still exists. The sort of relationships and friends, people that you're not seeing, thinking about maybe even the environment, things, the way the world might be affected, and it's distant. It's maybe also learning about people's experiences that aren't yours. And so it's been really a year of thinking about what all these things sort of mean. So I wanted to start off by talking about some of these prints and this process that I've started to develop over the past few years. What you're looking at is a brand new print. It was finished in 2021. It's called Benthic. And it basically came to the gallery still wet. It was so fresh 2 weeks ago. And it's kind of imagining the bottom of the sea. And you'll see later on in this talk that I have been collaborating with scientists that are, researching in the sort of benthic environments. And so this has been sort of a natural transition. And so, okay. So for those of you that don't know, I make a lot of these prints, with cans, regular tin cans pulled out of the recycling bin at various places and collected. And I kind of cut and build and, sort of play with them and make all these sort of different forms. And oftentimes I'll present these cans themselves, but I'll also build them into these vessels. Now that first print you saw, those shapes were built with these cans. And so really, this is, probably about 20 different tin cans and built and slowly made into these open bottom vessels that I use to print on the surface of the paper. And they're these slow, inefficient objects, these really time-based pieces. So in the prints, you really sort of get a sense of time. But looking at the prints, you'll see that they're built from and printed from different kinds of ink. A lot of times it's dirt, oxidized metal, different dyes, swept up dirt from the floor, and all sorts of things that I'll be talking about. And so here, oftentimes I'll show the printing plates along with the prints. So here's an example of a printing press, and it's basically these slow objects. And so each print kind of built up of these stacks and tiers, and they're this, they're collected from a bunch of found materials. And so this piece is called Iowa Stack, and it's just collected from objects along the road, specifically in Iowa. Here's a couple images from a couple of the cans that are in the exhibition currently. And these are part of a project that I call Library of Forms. And so really, oftentimes when I get these cans, I cut and I play, and I don't have a goal, and I just make these shapes by bending in a bending break. And then I have this collection, and then I sort of sift through them to make the vessel for printing. So here's an example of a little bit more complicated press in the space right now. That center area is sort of the guts and the heart of the whole thing. And so all these tubes kind of lead down to the bottom of this open bottom vessel. Sort of a detail of that. And so these 4 prints were made from that previous press. And this is an earlier print that I really like to see every so often. It's it was a print that I sort of learned a lot about this process. And really, this process is a really growing sort of thing where I'm constantly getting to know it. And, really the funny thing is I cut open a can 13 years ago for the first time, and then it's been slowly evolving. I walk away from it, and then I come back to it. And so I wanted to show you this little family. So this is that plate for that previous print touching the paper. This is another large print that's in the show. And this is actually printed with turmeric and sawdust. And this was kind of a new experiment where I'm kind of printing and moving around the page and kind of having fun with it and it being a little bit looser than previous. Detail. And actually that's the form that I'm using to print a previous one. Need a sip of water here. So I wanted to do a little bit of time travel in this talk and jump back to a time when I kind of I was out of undergrad and I moved to New York City. And so I worked as a costume and prop technician, and it was a really great education after undergrad. So I was working on building props and costumes for Broadway. And this was a time where it kind of made me start to really appreciate the tool or the object or the functioning thing. And so this is a clown head made of paper mache that is for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And then this is a fish head for Hansel and Gretel, the opera. This is actually, I love pictures of the costumes and the objects before they got all bedazzled. This is from the Nutcracker, and this is the Nutcracker that they still use at the San Francisco Ballet. It looks orange and has kind of like a Civil War theme to it, but that's it. When it falls apart, it breaks apart and can click back together. So now this is a puppet, a deer puppet, and I rather show you this image of kind of the guts of it and what the underneath sort of looks like, as opposed to the finished product, because I think that this, like, the touch is really beautiful. And I learned a lot about working around these people on Broadway, because sometimes we would work on Broadway and then off Broadway, and we would be very creative about materials, learning, actually trying to work on a budget, say. And that was a real formative moment where it was, okay, let's take whatever scraps we can find to make this thing, and you cover it up and it looks beautiful, but it functions. This is from a movie called Across the Universe, directed by Julie Taymor, and these are the characters of the Blue People. So my boss was really great. His name was Martin Izquierdo, and the experience was really wonderful because he took on jobs that were basically a challenge, and it was never taking on the same project twice, and it might be a bad business move, but it was really he was really excited about pushing what he was doing as a designer and craft person. So living in New York, I really became interested in printmaking because I could not afford a studio. And that was kind of my way in. The idea of a shared space ends up being actually it makes it working more affordable. So basically the shared space, I got a flat file drawer at Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop. And then I got to meet a whole bunch of people and take a bunch of classes and really dig into that spirit of printmaking. And that's something that's really important to my work, as well as I think to drive my work, I guess, the community of making. So fast forward ahead, I wanted to show you another community, which is what I'm a part of now. And this is the University of Iowa Printmaking. And the beauty of a print shop is, having this shared access, sharing ideas. This is from a visit from Carmen Coangelo, who the visiting artist took this picture. And this is making a really large print with Steve Prince when he was visiting and sharing his process. So I kind of wanted to jump back a little bit, back to that time when I was living in New York. And I learned a lot about, I guess, making. Another, sort of moment of thinking about the studio, questioning where making could happen. When I first got to New York, I was knitting quite a bit, and I learned how to knit and spin wool. And so this was a piece that I made when my partner and I got engaged. And so this was all spun wool and knit. And I actually knit a bunch of it, most of it on the train. And so thinking about what your studio could be. So your studio could be your lap. Now, this is a piece called the Adirondack Forum that Judy was mentioning earlier. And so it is made of old printing blocks, and it's this perfect sort of circle of 10 chairs. Where the beauty of an Adirondack chair is that armrest, and really that's kind of the factor that makes it an Adirondack chair, actually. Your armrest where you put your stuff on it. So I like the idea of maybe taking this armrest and extending it to the next chair, to the next chair, and the next chair. And this ended up being a sort of a movable venue, a place to relax, a place to share ideas. And so there were several places where we set it up. And this is a picture of right before doing an event in this auditorium in Round Lake, New York. And then just setting it up and having it be a relaxing place around a tree. Now, here you'll see a presentation by Aaron Morris. Aaron Morris was a beloved community member in Round Lake, New York. Aaron actually passed away on January 3rd of this year. He was a passionate beekeeper and arborist, an amazing person. In his presentation, he brought bee boxes to the forum and taught us about bees. And in some cases, bees actually made it to the forum. So it was almost like he was calling. And in this process, Aaron taught us about bees and taught us about trusting bees. And it was this really interesting thing, because most of us nervously trusted Aaron. And it was just a beautiful community moment. Now, this is a piece called The Manipulatives, and it is another sort of functional object or toy based on the idea of a manipulative, or another sort of early childhood education moment where a manipulative is this object that could be other things, like a block of wood could be an airplane, or it could be a fire truck and make noise, so we can imagine things doing things. And so, but really what they are is these objects in a box that come out of the box. And then it sort of starts to make sense that they are actually figures that are dancing, and they can dance on this stage. Once the box flips, it's a stage and the others sort of look on. And so oftentimes this might be in a show, and it might hold that form for a long while, and it will start to bend. It's paper, it's laminated paper. So when it goes back to center, the objects will go back in the box and get stored. And it's almost as if they are, relaxed and brought back to their normal resting place. So I wanted to tell you about a project that has, the last two projects are fairly older, but this work that I'm going to show you now is really in the past 2.5 years. where I got the opportunity to learn from and collaborate with Dr. Joan Bernhardt, senior scientist of the Geology and Geophysics Department at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And so Dr. Bernhardt has been studying foraminifera for decades, and she's been particularly studying forams in this location where we traveled to, which I'll talk about in a bit, which is the Santa Barbara Basin. So in May 2018, I was invited to spend 10 days on a research vessel on the Robert Gordon Sprawl that traveled from San Diego to Santa Barbara Basin with marine biologists, chemists, biologists, PhD candidates, the ship's crew, and all in an effort to generate prints in response to the chief scientist's research. So, like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Joan Bernhardt studies foraminifera, but an important thing about foraminifera is that they're surviving and adapting in dead zones, low oxygen environments. Foraminifera or forams are single-celled organisms that are found in all marine environments. These organisms are studied because of their unique response or adaptability to global change and the ability to study their fossil records. So in Dr. Bernhardt's words, with the expansion of dioxia, absence of oxygen in the world's oceans due to global change, the capacity for organisms to adapt and persist in low to no oxygen environments is essential to sustain life. Foraminifera present a unique and environmentally relevant model, Foraminifera present a unique and environmentally relevant model in which to study the physiological response to unique environmental relevant in which to study the physiological response of such external forcing. I was lucky to meet Dr. Bernhardt through Laura Van Rosk and Dr. Samuel Bowser when they were organizing an art exhibition that was kind of focused on adaptation to extremes. So forams were sort of at the heart of this. So here's an example of a few foraminifera. And what I did was I spent a long while making the traditional prints, sort of looking at and learning about using this either Dr. Bernhardt's research or on my own accord, kind of looking into and learning about these organisms. And what I was really became interested in is some of the unique attributes that these single-celled organisms had. And I would focus on to make traditional prints just based on single sort of attributes. Here's a shot of the exhibition. Here's a detail of a foram that was kind of embellished, but looking at some of the research images that were sent to me. But this is an agglutinated foraminifera. And this was really kind of a fascinating thing, thinking about this organism makes its shell based on grabbing objects to make a, sand particles and other parts and pieces in the ocean to make their home. And I believe they use something like glue, calcium carbonate as the glue to kind of make this sort of happen. And so I made a lot of prints that were kind of just ruminating on what a foraminifera is, what the surface of it might look like. This is a double-sided screen print. And then this is an intaglio, kind of also looking at the more agglutinated forams. And these are large prints that are about 40 inches by 26 inches wide. And these are based on a very specific foraminifera that Dr. Bernhardt researches. The one on the right is actually drawn with my drawn through the printing process through intaglio, and working through the ground and etching my fingerprints onto the plate. And these are shaped plates and they're heavily embossed. And actually they use some inks that I made that were collected when we were out to sea. Here's another detail of a sort of embellished foram. So I wanted to share some images of what it was like kind of going out onto the ship, because this was a totally foreign experience for me. And it was just this great learning opportunity, learning experience. And so for someone who doesn't go out go out to sea, this experience was sort of fascinating. There were moments where we felt like miles and miles away from land, and it was just a sublime experience. And then also at the same time learning about the smallness of things, where things were vast, but then we're also learning about all this research for this tiny organism. These are the sleeping quarters. This is the back of the ship, the fan tail, where a lot of the equipment was stored. And these are the tools that we would use to grab water at the different levels in the water column, or actually collect mud from the bottom of the sea.
What's this mean all about?
And this is a tool called the MC800, and just a beautiful object. So this object, showing it getting drops into the sea and going down, in some cases, 500 meters plus to grab mud. And basically it was the spring-operated tool where it will go down to the bottom of the ocean and then grab like 4 centimeters, or well, 14 inches of mud, say, but the 4 centimeters were more of the most important mud where we would be collecting the Foraminfera. So here's an example up close of the MC800. And then this is that tube going down into the ocean and down in and collecting the mud. And so essentially what you're seeing here is roughly undisturbed kind of bottom of the sea. And we would actually push this mud out of this tube, and then we would scrape it and put them into little vials and other containers. So there would be, this is essentially the lab on the ship. And then here they would actually observe the forams immediately, just to know what they were getting. And they were studying other things that I'm not quite sure. But also a thing to note is that all this mud, a lot of the mud was kind of collected and brought back to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And so my job, part of my job being on the ship, was this experience of working in this walk-in cooler. You know, it's really interesting to be in California, like the best weather you can imagine. I hung out in this walk-in cooler, and we were kind of splitting up these vessels and filling them with mud and salt water, and getting from each event collected. So there were this experience of collecting, each time a tool went into the ocean, it was called an event. And so everything was really well labeled, all the locations in Santa Barbara Basin, and then sent back to Woods Hole to be studied. And I got the question a lot about how'd you eat? And so this is an important image too. So After working and learning about Foraminfera and that, I came back after collecting, because I got to travel to Woods Hole, I got to travel to California and learn about the research. And in that time, I was collecting little bits of things and, filling up my suitcase and then parts and pieces. There's some stuff from my studio that kind of was reminiscent of what we were what the life on the ship sort of looked like. But I was kind of collecting all this stuff to make a new printing press from the elements from Woods Hole Oceanographic as well as scripts. And so here's a detail of the press that I made. And so still sort of working with the idea of tin cans, these sort of ubiquitous objects. The name of this printing press is actually called Biomarkers, and that is a term that I kind of was really gravitating towards. I kind of, a biomarker is essentially the trace of a foreign substance in a living organism. And I kind of thought that that was a really interesting thought. Also kind of thinking about it of like a anthropogenic sort of thing where pollutants might be involved in a being. And so I think it's important to note that these presses, I sort of think of them, and a lot of my objects, I think of them as figures that are workers making performers. So here's a couple of prints from that press. And what you're looking at is inks that are oxidized metal from collected, actually from the tool, the printing press they were looking at, walnut ink and different muds. It was really fun to think about how to title this. And working with Dr. Joan Bernhardt and Dr. Samuel Bowser, I asked them to name this new species that we were sort of making in this process. And I can't say that name, and I really like that idea that I cannot really pronounce it. So I just call it anoxiki. But it has a scientific name, and it means belonging to the sandy anoxic underworld. And so here's a couple more examples of these prints. A lot of these sort of gray browns, these are made from the mud in Santa Barbara. And the orange in that's actually basically the cans breaking down. And then some of the greens in that's copper from some of the tools I collected. The the white, what you're seeing is actually from Iowa water, which is, I spend most of my time in Iowa. And this ink I've been sort of distilling, which I'm gonna show you in a bit. A couple more examples of the anoxiki. This is sort of what it looks like, me sort of feeding, I guess, the press or putting the ink in, and it's slowly going down to the bottom. In some cases, the ink is sort of clogged, so it drips, but it is typically this slow process. And in most cases, in my studio in Iowa, it takes about 3 or 4 days to make a print. And so this is ink made from something like that chipboard that you were just looking at. So there's mostly copper in there, but there's also some other sort of foreign metals in there. And here is a good example of some of that white I'm printing. And here is the process of transforming the mud into ink. And so I dry it out and then work it with a mortar and pestle. And I like this image because these are the exact containers that we used in Santa Barbara when we were collecting the mud. And I was able to just, extra ones that weren't being used, I packed up my suitcase and brought a bunch of mud home. And so this is what I was getting to with making that white tone. It's basically just Iowa water in these concrete mixing trays and slowly evaporating. And so letting it evaporate several times, and things like maybe the calcium in the water is that white. And so scraping it out and then turning that into ink. And I really like this idea that in some of these prints having that mud from Santa Barbara, which is the farthest, most mysterious place I can imagine that I got to go to or be close to. And then here, this is made in my studio just with water. And this piece is actually in the show. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the outreach that I do. I guess in projects, and in some cases they're sort of like performances or maybe workshops or fictionalized experiments, and it's just a way to kind of it's a kind of way to maybe a way to teach and a way to share some of this work. In this case, I'm going to share some of the outreach that I did through the science. And this is a case where just basically teaching preschool students about Foraminfera. And they're making drawings and that. And this is from the Round Lake School, which is a school that my partner started. And this is getting advice on how to, making this printing press. This is at a printmaking conference, and it's basically telling the story of what goes on the ship, very similar to what you just heard. But a few of my students and another professor, Tom Christensen, we performed as if we were the scientists that were studying Foraminifera and sharing what we learned. So these are actually Xerox, is large format Xerox on vellum, and it kind of, the bus turned these images into something like a light box. And so this is Kalei Blakemore on the left, who is playing Dr. Joan Bernhardt. And then in the back, there is Casey Matthews playing Samuel Bowser. And there's Tom Christensen playing a biologist, and then myself. Now, I was invited to do a project with this class at the University of Michigan, which was a costume and fashion class. They invited me to collaborate, make a project with them. And so we decided to make a video, but it was a video where there was a cast of characters. And so I made a series of drawings that were costumes that were the characters of chemists, biologists, assistants, a lead scientist, and there were actually foraminifera that were actually life-size. And so all costumes, all characters worked together and collected water and mud and actually distilled and transformed materials and made prints. I'll show you an example of this. But here are some of the characters. There's the chemist on the right. This is actually a controlled variable, which is basically it's a walled structure where these characters could move around. And so I sent them the drawings from afar, and they kind of responded to them and made the pieces. And so here's what the students sort of came up with, and we made this rehearsed video. And here are a few stills from the piece. This woman with the orange hat is the lead scientist and giving direction and showing us how to properly use the tools and move us through. And here's some collected mud that we're going to be transforming. And here's some large foraminifera. And there's the control variable. And so this gives you a sense of how you use the control variable. And here we are making a print on the ground with the mud that were collected. So this really absurd project that was actually really beautiful, I think, in kind of creating a system of working together. But in the same time, it was this sort of outreach, it was kind of explaining what I learned and what I knew about foraminifera. It's really fun to think that, oh, college students now know what foraminifera are. And then, oh, a preschool student knows what a foraminifera are. So I wanted to show you a few sort of end with a few shots of the exhibition here. And this is the title wall when you first walk in, where there's a collection of plates, cans, and a stack of what I call bales, which were sort of old projects that were kind of altered and transformed. And then here's an image of the first press. There's a total of 3 presses in this exhibition. And this is predominantly the one that I'm working with to make new prints in the exhibition at this point. To the left here are 2 prints that I made at an exhibition in Arkansas a few years back. And it's those are really rich and a lot of sort of oxidized metal and playing with sawdust for printing. This is a back wall of prints that will eventually be rotating prints throughout the show. There's frame prints in the show, but there's also these sort of loose prints on these angled platforms, or angled wall mounts, rather. So another thing, I think, thinking about this title of Object Permanence, approximately 15 years ago or so, I played music pretty frequently. And I think that actually as a kid, way prior to that, I think music was the thing that brought me to the arts. And maybe moving to New York or something, whatever, I stopped playing guitar, stopped being involved with music and sound. And since the pandemic and since having a newborn baby, I started, playing guitar again and also communicating with sound with my daughter. And so these are basically cigar box guitars, and you can tell the one on the right is made from a tin can, and it's all from wood my father cut down the trees, or had it on his, he heats the house with wood, but it's all just sort of collected wood and metal. I'm experimenting with making these pickups, which are just hand wound. The one on the left is called the Sanchez and Haya guitar. My wife's family is her grandmother side. They came to America from Spain through Cuba, and they were cigar manufacturers. And Sanchez and Haya, they are the Sanchez and Haya. And so they early days. So we have this box, and I made this guitar, extended it, made it a little larger with wood from my father's collection. And so, yeah, and so now I'm making noisemakers again. I'm making noisemakers. And here's an example of two sort of maybe um, uh, uh, a play on the idea of a guitar or a stringed instrument, and I call them benders. At this point, they're called benders, and it's really, you know, exactly what they do is you play it with a copper piece of copper, and then have these beautiful sort of bending sound, and it's really atmospheric. And this piece will be, some of these will be played on a Thursday night event coming up. And this is a new sound piece, also a sculpture made of tin cans. So, excuse me, this piece is called Interstitial Planes, and it is about 13 or 14 separate little instruments that are controlled by motors. And Michael Yanero made a post on this piece recently, and I liked the video, so I'm going to share it with you. Can you all see this? No.
No, it's not playing, Terry.
Okay. You see just the URL?
Yeah.
All right. Bear with me. Okay, do you see it now? Okay. Okay, here's an example of the interstitial planes. Right, and here are a few more images from the show, and what I'd like to share with you is this piece. This is called the Iowa Booth. And so the Iowa Booth is a 9-sided object, and I happen to be sitting in it right now. And so it's sort of riffing on the idea of an old voting booth, a 4-sided structure. And the idea of this was that it was sort of blown up to this larger piece. And it is an educational space, a space to share ideas. It's a soapbox, a space to embrace our current time of Zoom life and bring that to the exhibition. So it's functioning as a broadcast booth. Every Thursday, there'll be a new event during the duration of the show. And so also it's a sort of a living thing in that these canvas walls are always changing. And they kind of reference some of the other objects in the exhibition. This is an example, or this is the basic design of the early antique voting booth. So last week was our first event. It was a pre-recorded talk by Sylvia Secchi, who is a colleague of mine at the University of Iowa. And I recommend watching her talk. It'll be on the Opalka website eventually. And her focus is land-based energy production, water quality, adaptation to climate change, floodplain management. And I'm excited to say that Sylvia is a future collaborator, and we're going to be making prints together. And so tomorrow, Dr. Joan Bernhardt, who you heard a lot about today, is going to be giving a talk tomorrow on her research in Foraminfera. So that'll be a good one. On February 25th, Tommy Santa Claus, a musician currently living in Iowa City, and he has something like 14 self-released albums. He makes really beautiful music and noise. And he's going to be performing with some guitars that I built, microphones, and then also the sound piece that you just saw with the cans. He has written some pieces to go along with those. And Dante Hayes, who is an amazing artist that's getting a lot of attention right now. His work pulls from hip hop, history, science fiction, science, and the artwork references visual traditions of Southern United States, the Caribbean, South America, and the African continent. And finally, on March 11th, Brian Dewan will be performing in the Iowa booth, and we'll both be working on performing together, but he will be presenting some of instruments that he has built and some of the instruments that I have built. And so he's sort of kind of leading the way and putting together some compositions. So I wanted to end this talk specifically with these little pieces. These are probably the smallest pieces in the show, and they are foil printed tin cans. And when I was first learning about the research on Foraminfera, walking into school every day, I saw these smushed cans on the side of the road, and then started to use them as a substrate to basically really simply foil and then draw into. And then I kind of appreciate that they are in some ways the opposite of the presses, in that they're really light and they can be put in an envelope, sent somewhere. Okay, thank you so much for coming to the talk, and please, I'd love to answer any questions if you have them.
Thanks, Terry. I want to show the video of the interstitial planes, if that's okay.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
cool.
Your sound didn't play, so for
Oh,
everyone who's
no.
interested in sticking around, it's just a few minutes long, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And then you can ask questions to Terry about the sound pieces. So I'm gonna share that right now. We couldn't end it without that great video. It's quite an amazing instrument. So I'm glad we got to showcase it. Everyone, if you have questions, please ask them in the chat box, and we will call on you to talk to Terry. So I'm just going to turn it right over. Mary Kozev, you had a question for Terry.
Oh,
Hi, Terry.
oh man. Wow.
How are
Mrs.
you?
Mrs. Koza, my high school art teacher. Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and you're certainly doing wonderful things. What a pleasure it's been to have this
Wow,
chance to see you up close and personal and see what you've been making. So my
wow,
question
thanks.
has to do with the printmaking or the printing presses.
Mhm.
So you have them there in the gallery, and are they always constantly making prints? Do you have to go in and feed them?
Yeah.
And in the course of the exhibition, how many prints are you generating? And then what happens to the prints as you turn them out?
Yeah, all good, great questions. Right now I'm living about an hour away, 45 minutes away. And so I come in every couple of days or even more to work with the presses. So they are printing, and there should be one ready tomorrow. It took a while to get the timing right because this is a room with very low humidity, and I'm used to some humidity. So and then there's snowstorms and stuff, but really, yeah. So far I have about 2 prints, and now that I have some momentum, I think there'll be several by the end of the show. And that's just working with the one press right now. Later on in the show, I think maybe I'll start working on some of the presses in the back of the room. It's kind of hard. I guess you don't know where the back of the room is, but I plan on starting to have a couple going at once. Right now, there's one that's functioning, and then 2 are kind of set up. They're labor intensive, I guess, in that each one, the whole structure goes up and then comes down. So it's kind of about this really inefficient process, and like the slowest way to make a multiple. And it is a tool, but it is an inefficient one. Inefficient one. Yeah. Did I answer all parts of your
Yes,
question?
I think you did. I have a lot of more questions, but I better
good.
email you because I think there are a lot of questions there in that chat box. So
Oh yeah. Well, okay. We'll see if you have more later. Cool. Good
Thanks,
to see you.
Mary. Thanks, Mary. Dawn Dishaw, do you have a question?
Yep, that's me. Hi. Hi. I do. Terry, watching your video, watching your talk, 2 things become really clear: that you really like to dig into becoming expert on something, whether or not, I mean, it's not easy to make a cigar box guitar out of nothing, and it's not easy to figure out some of these processes, but then there's a simultaneous drive to like go out and to follow unknown threads. And I don't know so those 2 things seem like one goes this way and one goes this way. And I'm wondering if you are able to just speak about your relationship to both of those things.
Yeah. So I guess, I started off talking about being a craftsperson on Broadway, and like learning how to do something. I love, making things, and I love the history of making things. But I also kind of like wrestling with chance, so I think I'm often changing the variables, working with something like retrofitting something to do something else. So it's kind of from the beginning, maybe I'm okay at crafting it, but it's also not quite right. So it's always kind of working towards it. So it will never be, say, perfect, because it has this other history. But I also kind of trace that back to just, my father, he's a farmer, could fix anything. And, kind of maybe it's not the right material some way. you know, in a lot of ways. And so it might look kind of funky, but it also is like done really well considering, you know, the wrong materials. So I guess I don't know. I think I want this control, but then also kind of infusing it with being surprised. That's a big part of it too, is you know, being surprised with the thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you.
Amanda
Thanks,
Frost.
bye.
Hi, I'm Amanda. My question was, so you mentioned making imagery of the Foraminiferas with screen print. I'm curious if you use natural materials to make those prints, and if you did, what kind of like elements and materials that are natural are safe to push through a screen?
Yeah. Well, so yes, I use both. I guess traditional like speedball inks, but I also use I'll use a base, like a traditional base, but then a mortar and pestle of you know, if I'm using say mud. In this case, I've used mud from Santa Barbara, that ink that I've been making, and I really just kind of grind it down really fine, because that's really a lot of times what the pigment is already. Yeah, and then also there's different mesh counts, which getting kind of geeky, but you know, like using a lower mesh count when it's like, if you want it to be kind of granular still, you know, so it kind of feeling like it's ground up rock or dirt or something, you know. Yeah.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, if you, yeah.
Oh, do you have something more to say, Terry?
No, I think that's it. But I was just gonna say, if you ever want to, you can write me about questions about that too, if you're ever.
That sounds great.
you'd like-
Also, I also want to comment, I was on that bus for SGC that you did that skit.
Oh my, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. Cool. All right. Great. In Dallas.
Yes, it was super
In Dallas.
entertaining.
Oh, great.
That's
Wow.
great. That's
Thank
great. Michael Oman, are you still on?
you.
Hey, Terry, Judy, everyone.
Hi, Michael.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
How's it?
Well,
How you doing?
Good, Terry. It's a wonderful talk and great questions. I think, you know, good talks inspire great questions. You know, I often bring a lot of things in my teaching back to Duchamp's ideas, and I was particularly struck by one of his questions that he generated, I think when it was around the time that he was doing these machines, these rotary optics, these things that spun around and made kind of optical effects. And his question was, can one make works that are not works of art? And, you know, whenever I see your shows, when I'm lucky enough to be near one, like the last time, I was really reminded of the relationship that you kind of tease out between printmaking and, I guess, democracy, like voting, and how printing has been so essential to, you know, gathering popular opinions. And, you know, and we've seen how horribly wrong that can go with the hanging chads and things like that. And then this time around, I'm reminded of how much science has relied on printmaking and books to kind of disseminate ideas.
Oh,
over
yeah.
time.
Mhm.
And so, so I guess those two things are sort of about some deeply kind of non-art things that we're involved with, and yet at the same time, you know, you're kind of bringing things back to the vehicle of art, at least. But I'm wondering, you know, with these different practices and with your new machines, is this about, you know, communicating with your daughter first as a dad, and then maybe you see the potential for art in it? You know, how are you, I guess, do you have different kind of Venn diagrams that your work falls in?
I think so. I think I want it to be functional objects. You know, I like that idea that I see a lot of friends that I went to Alfred University with here, and that came to the talk. And I think going to a place like Alfred, which is very much a ceramic school, and the cup and like how important that is, like the thing it functions. It's not only about the cup, but it's maybe about the party, you know. And I was always really drawn to the potential of what something like ceramics did, and creating a gathering. And I often get this question of, what's the most important thing? Is it the print? Is it the sculpture? Or is it like people gathering? And I think it's always sort of changing. And for sure, if you were to tell me a year ago that I was putting guitars in a gallery, I wouldn't believe it. And so, but I'm totally excited about the potential of what they can be in the future. And it all came from, making noises with my daughter.
Well, it's wonderful. I really like to think about the lineage of things like, Duchamp's errata musical and his machines, leading into Jean Tinguely and his things that made, if not music, sound. And, to see what I would say is a very, a focused visual artist kind of branching out. It's nothing but great. So thanks again.
Wow. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. We have time for one more. Carmen, would you like to answer your question?
Thank you, Judy. Thanks. I'm glad you played that video too with the sound. So thank you for that. Well, Terry, a lot of questions I do have, and I'm going to spare some of them, but I am really interested kind of in your notions. Obviously, Duchamp and the ready-made's been mentioned, but I am kind of interested in not only the process of hybridity and the transformative and translation aspects of both printmaking and machine, but does it also negate digital technology in some way with the because it does seem poetically charged rather than, and maybe there's a critical discourse around the body and, and digital technology, since it is mostly analog and somewhat nostalgic at the same time,
mm-hmm.
and performative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am, not against the computer by any means, but, and I don't think that you're asking that, but I do like this idea of tangible things, talking about even a toy, like manipulative, or I think it's not only the toy, but it's also the craft or transforming something. So I guess the slow experience is what I enjoy in the studio. The slow experience that is a surprise,
Mm-hmm. Great.
Does that make sense?
That's a great one to end on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I mean, I speak from experience that Terry's work really, we had quite a funny time trying to record a digital version of the sound piece, and it really resisted that, I think, Terry. I think it is an analog
Yeah.
system, and it's wonderful to see Terry play the instruments because the performative aspect is so nice. So I say all this to really encourage you all to come out on Thursdays and to really be in the gallery as much as we can be safely, and to sit with Terry, because so much of his work is about that party and that gathering. And as we really talked about what the show could be during COVID, I mean, the reason Terry is sitting in a booth that he thought of for this show was just to do that, to create a stage for this kind of conversation. And so I hope everyone, takes advantage of the opportunities we have put together to keep interacting with the show, both in person and online through other digital events. So again, I'm going to send everyone to our website, opalka.sage.edu, where you can find all of the recordings of past events and information about future events. I also want to correct something I said earlier. The catalog, which you can pre-order, the essay is going to be written by Nicole Woods, not Nicole Hayes, another curator we work with, but Nicole Woods, a wonderful essay by Nicole will be in that. So if you're interested in the catalog, please do go to our website for pre-order, and join me in a Zoom applause for Terry. Thanks so much, Terry, and we look forward to having you in the gallery for a few more weeks. So thanks, everyone.
Great to see everyone. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.